Hello, I'm Virginia Bolshakova. I'm a professor of science education in the College of Ed, but I'm also a beekeeper and honey connoisseur. Today I'm going to talk to you about honey sensory evaluation. Honey sensory evaluation enables a trained taster to distinguish the botanical origin of honey and to identify and quantify the honey sensory profiles as well as possible defects. Honey sensory evaluation can also help in defining standards for labeling, control, and provide useful information for the consumer. Digging into the tasting protocol, I like to go by the 5 S's technique. The first S in the 5 S's technique is to see the honey. Next up is stir and smell the honey. And the final S's are to smear and savor that honey on top of your tongue. First things first, when you see a jar of honey, do you know where it came from? Do you know the geographical origin? Is there a botanical origin associated with it? Do you happen to know the supplier? Or even better yet, do you know the beekeeper? Luckily today, I know the geographical and botanical origin because I was the beekeeper who harvested this honey. Now, if you don't have that information, usually, and it should, your honey should have a label on it. And on that label, it will provide you information of where it was grown. And this label, it says it's a product of Michigan by Firefly Fields. That's the name of our business. And so that gives me an idea. Also on the label, I can see that this label tells me when it was harvested and also the varietal honey. Today, we're going to sink ourselves into some buckwheat honey as well as some clover honey grown on the farm. When you go to a farmer's market, you often have an opportunity to talk directly to the beekeepers. And so when you see the honey, ask them questions. You know, when was that harvested? What was blooming around while the nectar was being collected by the bees? In this case, I know on our farm, being an organic farm, we use a lot of cover crops. And we had red clover on about 100 acres. And so this honey was extracted right at the finish of that bloom, and we were able to isolate that so we could pull that clover honey. So what do we have here in this very special dark colored honey bottle? So we have some buckwheat honey here. In 2019, it was a very, very rainy May and June. So rainy, in fact, that we were unable to plant any of our organic beans. So in lieu of that, a lot of farmers, including ourselves, planted a cover crop of buckwheat. Well, that buckwheat bloomed and we were able to have honeybees right adjacent to multiple 100 acres of buckwheat. And so that bloom and nectar flow lasted a few weeks and we were able to collect about 200 pounds of buckwheat. So more on this later. So before you even think about seeing the honey just for color and other things, first ask yourself, do I know where this honey came from? But when we're talking about seeing your honey, we're really talking about visual analysis. Look at the honey sample to evaluate and describe color and color intensity. Pick up your glass or cup and tilt it toward a white surface. There we go. Look at the color and color intensity and evaluate it using the Fun Color Guide. If I look at this clover honey, I can see on this Fun Color Guide that it fits somewhere between water white and extra white. That's typical for a clover honey. Let's take a look at that buckwheat honey. Oh, it's so much darker, isn't it? You know, if you hold it into the sunlight, it actually shows kind of an amber reddish color. Let's go ahead and hold it up to the Fun Color Guide here. When we look at that, we can see it fits somewhere between this amber and darker amber color. All right, very different, but also very distinctive for a buckwheat honey. Next up is stir and smell the honey. Here I'm referring to olfactory analysis, where you will smell the honey sample to evaluate intensity and persistence and describe aromas. So pick up the honey tasting glass. So I've moved these into some nice little goblets. Pick it up, keep it covered. That's important, keep that lid on. Place it on the palm of your hand and allow that temperature from your skin to rub onto the outer glass. This will warm the glass a little bit, bringing the honey to ambient temperature. Next, I'm going to remove the lid. Using my tasting spoon that I have, I'm going to stir the honey clockwise 3 times. This will increase the surface contact with the honey and release more aromas. By the way, did you know individual honeys from different plant sources contain over 100 volatile organic compounds, or VOCs, which play a primary role in determining honey flavors and aromas? VOCs are carbon-based compounds that readily vaporize into the air, providing aroma, including the scents of flowers, essential oils, ripening fruit, animal, all of those things. That's why it's important to keep that lid on. So after I've taken my 3 turns, I bring the tasting cup up to my nose, smell for about 5 seconds. Give it a little break, 3 to 4 seconds, and then take another 5-second deep smell. During this step, you'll get a first impression of the honey sensory characteristics, positive or negative. Right away, when I smell this clover honey, I get a scent of dry hay. It's kind of herbaceous, a little grassy, and a good scent of a stone fruit, almost like a little bit of peach, but then maybe some plum and apple as well. So it's got both a fruity tone as well as an herbaceous scent that comes with that dry hay. During this stir, I also get a sense of the physical state that it's in, whether it's completely liquid or it's starting to crystallize. This clover honey was collected in the fall of 2019. And so naturally, honey crystallizes, and this has absolutely started to crystallize, so it's very thick and viscous. Now we're gonna smear and savor the honey. This is my favorite part. Also called the gustative analysis, which is tasting the honey. Here, we're going to evaluate and describe the taste. We're also going to pick up on some of those retronasal aromas. That's where that nasal cavity joins our throat and really pick up flavor. Evaluate astringency. Does it make us pucker? Really feel the viscosity in our mouth. We'll also evaluate and describe the texture of the honey, including the crystallization if it's present. Note, crystallization is a natural process of real raw honey. It should crystallize eventually, at least most honeys. Now, once again, using the spoon, we're going to stir the honey clockwise 3 times. Using the spoon, we'll take a small amount of honey and place it onto our tongue, distributing it and smearing it throughout the whole oral cavity. This is your tongue, your gums, your roof. Cover your whole mouth and just let the honey melt. With your mouth closed, breathe out your nose. As the honey melts, continue to breathe out through your nose. Finally, swallow the honey. So when I first begin tasting this clover honey, it's very delicate, light. It's not like a blow you out kind of flavor. I definitely taste some fruity tones, the apple, a little bit of apple there, as well as when I'm breathing out through my nose, that grassiness comes out. At the end of it, there's a nice cinnamon burst. It's almost like apple pie because you've got the apples and you have the cinnamon together. And that's definitely a signature of clover honey. Now with this one being crystallized in really, really small textured crystals, it almost has a cooling effect. And that's a bonus that you get from the crystallization. So don't be afraid if you see crystallized honey to walk away from it. It may provide you a whole new sensory experience. As far as astringency, it didn't really make me pucker too much. You know, you kind of pucker when you think about lemon or things that are a little bit sour. So not really much, maybe a little bit on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the highest astringency, maybe a little bit, maybe a 3. As we already talked a little bit about the viscosity, so it's very, very creamy right now, especially with that crystalline form. And that's about it. So the flavor didn't last super long. I've had honeys that definitely persist a lot longer on the tongue. It kind of dissipates rather quickly, but has a nice smooth and cool finish with those crystals. After tasting, take a sip of water at room temperature. If you got a little green apple around or even some very bland bread, you can take a bite to nibble on that. You can even spit it out after you get done chewing it, just to kind of mellow out and kind of take off some of the edge from that previous tasting sensation. Take another sip of water. Swish it around. If you want to spit it, you can. I'm gonna drink it because it's a hot summer day and I need that water. Take a minute break or more if necessary, rest your senses, and then repeat the process with another sample. All right, now we're gonna move a little bit more quickly through a sensory analysis of buckwheat honey. So the first thing is to see the honey. So hold it up into the light, ideally against a white surface so you can really get a sense for the color. All right, now if you have access to a Fund Honey color guide, hold that up. And again, we've already described this before, but it tends to go between the amber and the dark amber in color. All right, so now I'm picking up my honey cup of buckwheat. And again, I'm holding it in the palm of my hand with the lid on top. I don't want those volatile organic compounds to dissipate too quickly and I miss them. But I'm gonna warm the honey slightly with my hand. Next, I'm gonna get my honey tasting spoon. And then we're gonna give it 3 stirs clockwise, and we're gonna smell it a few times, all right? So here we go, take the lid off. You either love buckwheat honey or you were like, whoa, what is this? It's so distinctive. Once you smell buckwheat honey, you will never forget what buckwheat honey smells like. People often say buckwheat honey smells like a pig pen. I like to say barnyard. I think that probably a more polite way to say it's like saddle leather. It smells like you're on a farm. That's what it smells like. I think barnyard is the right way to describe it, but maybe saddle leather, or even a little bit of sweat to it. But I also smell in there a little bit of date, like a dried fruit smell in it too. You know, when I smell those things, there's like a sweet animal type of smell to it, all right? It's got me very, very curious because it's completely different from the clover honey. Now, after I've had a chance to smell the honey, I'm gonna smear and savor the honey. That's the tasting part, all right? And so I stir it again a few times, get a little bit, get it ready to smear all across my mouth. Wow. So, I always say buckwheat honey is so bold and blissful. I love it. I think it's amazing. Again, not everybody loves it, but it's a little bit more astringent, makes me pucker a little bit more than the clover right away. It's also partially crystallized. The crystals are a lot bigger than the crystals of the clover honey, so I don't have that cooling effect in my mouth that I had before. But right away, I get this nice, like, dark cherry, a little chocolate even involved with it too. I'm gonna get a little bit more, because there was something else that kind of escaped me. Oh wow, the dark cherries are so strong in this. There's a little bit of cardamom spice in it too. So it's just got a completely different tone and flavor, and it lasts. I can still taste it right now in my mouth. So it has a very long lasting flavor and finish, which is different from the clover honey. The clover honey tended to dissipate a little bit more quickly, where this one stays. And I still get a little bit of that barnyard aroma, but it almost turns into like I don't know, to me it's almost like a warm, hot summer day after a rain. It's like it's rained and the mud, you know what it smells like when the mud comes up and you can smell the soil? That's kind of how I can scent that in the air, in that retronasal area in the back of my throat. But it is very sweet. It's actually got a little bit more powerful punch than I would say the clover honey does. But I love it, man. I could pair this with a nice, like, soft cheese. I think that would pair nicely, just the boldness of it. You know, some people have said that it's a nice replacement for like molasses. I think it could taste very different from molasses. It may have a little bit of a gingery, a nice complementariness with ginger, but it's its own thing for sure. So the buckwheat honey, lots of things you can do with that besides pairing it with maybe a soft cheese. You know, if you are you like cocktails, probably it would pair nicely with a whiskey. It's got a darker, it's very malty. That's the other thing I was thinking about. It was the smell of malt beer. So you get a little bit of that as well in this flavor. A couple tips to keep in mind. Always try to rest your senses before a tasting for 2 to 3 hours. So what does that mean? That means no food, coffee, tea, etc. Anything that's going to charge up your senses. Also, no perfumes or strongly scented soaps. It will definitely impact your ability to sense things more clearly. Water is absolutely okay. So definitely you can have water, just not those other things with smells. When you're sampling, limit yourself to about 3 samples at a time in each sitting. If you do too many more, it's gonna all start blending together. You'll find that your senses will quickly fatigue as you're just getting started and building your sensory muscles. With time and more practice, you'll be able to do more than 3 at a time. It's typically best to sample in order of lighter honey to more darker honeys. Practice, practice, practice. How can you practice? Develop your language around sensory descriptors. What does hay even smell like? How about cardboard? Go put your nose on it. Metal. Right now, there's so many blooms, peonies are blooming. Go put your nose in a peony. What about stone fruit? Have you ever really paid attention? Caramel, toast, all these things around you. Suddenly, your world is gonna be completely different because all you're gonna wanna do is smell everything around you. Go put your nose, safely of course, into things and give them a whiff. Taste them. Again, only if it's safe. Something I love to do is collect and sample honeys when I'm traveling. Travel can be across your city, from a rooftop hive to the middle of downtown to backyard bees in someone's neighborhood. It could be across the state or across states or even around the world. Taste the landscape of honey and get to know more about the geographical and botanical origins. Share those magnificent honeys with your friends and make it into a honey tasting party. But always remember, seek out honey as close as possible to the source to ensure you're actually getting the product it claims to be. Honey is the world's 3rd most adulterated food. Knowing where your honey comes from makes a big difference. With endless flavor profiles to discover and food pairings to match, you'll quickly discover honey deserves the same acknowledgement offered to wine, coffee, cheese, and olive oil. That is it. That concludes our honey tasting. I hope that you guys go out and explore, taste on your own, and in class, you're gonna create your own tasting video. I can't wait to see what you taste and how your experiences are. Now I'm gonna finish with a little sip of water to cleanse my palate, and I look forward to more tasting with you.